In this chapter, we are going to be talking about monopoly and monopsonies. And one of the things that kind of is now a little bit different than when you had taken Econ 130 is that if you remember that far back, you would have started with perfect competition, right? So there's this kind of, yes, I have my pen back here. We have this kind of continuum from no pricing power to total pricing power. And on this end of the spectrum is the perfect competition. The competition itself drives the prices down, but because they're all selling a um, non-unique good, meaning they're all selling the same good, no firm has an ability to charge more than another. That's the essence of perfect competition. On the other end of the spectrum is the monopoly, which is what we're dealing with in this chapter. And what makes a monopoly, what gives it total pricing power, is the fact that um, they have either um, a legal ability to stop others from making the product, so that would be like a patent, or there's a key resource that's needed to make the good, and one company has sole control over that resource. Um, there's also such a thing as we'll see the natural monopoly, where a single firm um, makes sense. It makes sense to have only a single firm. So, for instance, um, in Hawaii, the only company that sells actual phone line service would be Hawaiian Telecom. Yes, there are others that sell phone service, um, you know, but they do not use the traditional phone lines. Only Hawaiian Telecom does. And so there's your monopoly. Or Board of Water Supply, or even Hawaiian Electric. All have monopolistic powers naturally. And then what we'll see here in later chapters is that not exactly a unique product, so there's a little less pricing power. That's going to be the oligopoly. And then we'll see right here, we're going to see the monopolistic competition. Okay, so let's start. Okay, so as I kind of have said so far, when we have a monopoly, we have only one seller. A monopsony, which you may not have heard of so much, that would be where a market where there's only one buyer for that product. And there, that buyer then gains power because they are the only buyer. And what comes with that exclusivity, the reason why you fight and you pay so much money to have that exclusivity is that it gives you market power. I have no idea what the results are going to show here. Really? $0? That seems a little odd. Let's look at this open secret. Mm. Oh, interesting. So look at all this money they spent in 2014. Anyone want to take a guess of what happened in 2014? That was when Hawaiian Electric was going to get bought out, or almost got bought out by NextEra Energy in Florida. It looks like a lot of the spending is coming out from either, so you got two lobbyists, I see, six lobbyists. So why would Hawaiian Electric lobby anything? Well, the only reason why they lobby for anything. Let's just see here. What does it tell us? Ooh, that's interesting. It's actually not the electric company that's doing it. It's actually American Savings Bank that's doing it. Huh, interesting. Well, kind of goes against my earlier conclusion here. Let's see here. Sorry, I'm not trying to delay things here. I just don't believe that. I don't believe that they spend zero. Electric companies spend money to lobby because think about what is the biggest competitor right now to Hawaiian Electric. The biggest competitor is me and you. We can generate our own electricity using solar power. So they're certainly going to lobby for laws to be passed that restrict the ability to for consumers to use their own roof to generate electricity. Um, right, and they pretty much have. Um, and we also saw um, there was a company I think on the Big Island that wanted to burn like trees, wood to generate electricity, and that was also a pretty big lobbying effort as well. Well, let's go back to the actual slides here. Okay, now one of the most important things, one of the most important things is related to a firm and what its marginal revenue is going to be. So let's insert a slide here. And let's make it a blank slide. Okay. So even though we're not covering the chapter, let's remind ourselves about what we learned from principles of economics, microeconomics. In perfect competition, firms charge the market price. Now, here's my question for you. How much revenue do they take in when they sell one more unit? How much revenue do they take in when they sell one more unit? In essence, I'm asking you, what is the marginal revenue? Marginal revenue equals change in total revenue over change in quantity. How much does the revenue change when they sell one more unit? It's the market price. This is for the perfectly competitive firm. They can sell as much or as little as they want, and every time they sell one more unit, they get the market price. So the marginal revenue, for the case of the perfectly competitive firm, marginal revenue equals price. Now, let's add another slide here. Okay. Let's look at this for the monopoly. For the monopoly, the question would be, how much does their revenue change by when they sell more? What price do they charge? These are the questions that we're going to be answering here. What price do they charge? Whatever they want. That's what they charge. And what we're going to see here, I don't want this to be a murder mystery here. Don't want you to have to wait here to find out things. Marginal revenue is not going to be the same as price, and that's going to have an impact on things. Okay, I'll answer these questions. Okay, so let's look at this kind of simple chart that they made. And what it's doing here is it's looking at the quantity increasing. Here, we can see total revenue is increasing at a decreasing rate. Why is that? Right? Under perfect competition, I'm just going to write it as PC. Let's say that the price was 6, quantity, let's say 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Then total revenue is simply 6 times 1, 6, 6 times 2, 12, 6 times 3, 18, 6 times 4, 24, 6 times 5, 30, 6 times 6, 36. The marginal revenue was constant. The marginal revenue was always 6. Why does the price have to go down to sell more? Why does the price have to go down to sell more? The reason why the price has to go down to sell more is that they are the only seller of that product. So if they want to sell more, they have to lower the price. But, and this is important, they have to lower the price to every customer. So look at what was happening here. Let's change the color here. Actually, just let's erase what we had. When the price was $5, they sold 1 unit. To sell 2 units, they're going to charge the second customer $4, but also the first customer is now going to pay $4. The first customer used to pay $5, so they lost $1 here. But they gained $4. Lost 1, gained 4. That's why the difference is 3. So the marginal revenue, not only is the marginal revenue for the monopolistic firm not equal to price. In fact, marginal revenue is always less than price. And the reason for that is because that's the only way they can increase the quantity demanded is by lowering the price. But again, they then need to lower the price to everyone. And that's what's causing that small decrease right here. Let's just take one final step here. Let's look at what happens with the third unit. Now, they gained a third customer. Now they can only charge $3. So they're going to lose $2 from the first customer, $1 from the second customer. So 2 and 3, so a change of 3. But they gained 3 times 3, so they gained they added 3 here, So that's a change of 2, and this here would be that one additional customer, so that would be our change of 1 here. So what do we see here, right? When they sell the third unit, now they're going to capture $9 total in revenue. Going from 8 to 9 is $1. Okay. And so this is what we see then for the monopoly, is that they are charging, as they produce more, they have to capture a lower price. And so the marginal revenue is always less than the demand curve, which is also where the price is. Marginal revenue is less. In fact, the marginal revenue is twice as steep as the demand curve. Okay. And so what becomes important for us is to understand, how does a monopolist then make a decision about how much to sell? What should their quantity be? So for this kind of firm, what they're going to do they're going to want to do is they're going to want to find where marginal revenue equals marginal cost. Marginal revenue, which is right here, equals marginal cost, which is right here, right here. Okay. Step 2, find the price. To find the price, I have to go up to the demand curve. Right there. Now I know the quantity, and now I know the price. And so what we can see is that this firm, the monopolistic firm, faces an incentive to restrict output. Now, how do I know that to be? The monopolist faces an incentive to restrict output because they can then capture that higher price. If they were to flood the market with product, they would not be able to charge as much. And so, monopolists, in some sense, do have a social cost. There is a social detriment to having monopolists exist. And that social cost is that restricted output. So that is generally why it is a social policy, governmental policy, to stop monopolists from existing, or at least control them, which is what we do with Hawaiian Telecom, and it's what we do with Hawaiian Electric, is we place some restrictions on them being able to do whatever they want. All firms find their quantity where marginal revenue equals marginal cost. All firms do this. Perfectly competitive firms, monopolistic firms, they all find their quantity where the marginal revenue equals marginal cost. What is different is where the price exists. For the perfectly competitive firm, marginal revenue is the same as price, and it's the same as the demand curve. For the monopolists, marginal revenue is always less than the demand curve, which then means that only for the monopolist, that's again where you have to go up to the demand curve, like we did right here, to find the price. Okay, let's not worry about this right now. It's just trying to complicate something that doesn't need to really be complicated. It's complicated enough. Okay. So what we can see here for the monopolist with even just this kind of small graph over here is that profit is found where the marginal revenue equals the marginal cost. For the perfectly competitive firm, it turns out that the profit is zero. For the monopolist, it must necessarily be greater than zero, the profit levels. And that total profit is what we see right here. That difference between the average cost and the average revenue. Okay. There's nothing I really need to add here. So again, if I'm saying to you there's nothing to add here, you don't really need to worry about that slide that much. Remember, there's always going to be a difference between um, what the book has and the way that I'm talking about it. We have to do a little bit less detail only because this is a shorter course. Okay. Now, for the monopolist, we do have a pricing rule. Let's erase what we have here. The pricing rule would be that my level of profit is the inverse of the degree of elasticity. What does that mean? What is this slide trying to say to us? What it's saying is that you can be a monopolist in anything, any industry. But let's say that I am the monopolist for um, let's say that I'm the monopolist for number three pencils. Number three pencils. I've never faced a situation where I'm required to use a number three pencil. Never. So, what would my elasticity of demand be for a number three pencil? Probably the same as like what your preferences are for any number pencil except for number two, where there is a little bit of market power there. I mean, do you care if you write with a number one or a number three pencil? Probably not. So, how sensitive would you be to the price of a number three pencil going up dramatically in price? How would your quantity demanded change? It would probably change quite a bit because you don't care whether it's a number one or a number three pencil. Um, so the net result of that is that because it is so elastic, I mean, because that number is so great a number, that's what elasticity would be. The greater the number, the more elastic it is. My profit will be a lot lower. The only way to get a lot of profit would be to sell an inelastic good. That would be where the elasticity number is between 0 and -1. Right? All these are negative because of the law of demand, right? Buy more, receive less. Charge less, sorry. Um, so, what about a very inelastic good like electricity? In the case of electricity, because the elasticity of demand number is between 0 and -1, meaning it's just a fraction, then the profit ratio is going to be quite high because people have to buy that good no matter what is being charged. Which is why the state gets involved with the Public Utility Commission of how much is charged by the electric company. So this becomes a very important rule, and we will see this on the problem set, this pricing rule. Which again essentially says that the level of profit is the inverse of the degree of elasticity. And what we're seeing here is that it's determining our degree of markup. Markup being that difference between the price and the marginal cost. Okay, I'm going to skip the examples here. Um, what do I want to focus on here? I'm trying to shorten this here, but I also don't want to elaborate too long about things that don't matter as much. Sorry, I just want to see. Yeah, I'm okay with that. Okay. There's really not much more to say about if a firm is running multiple plants to produce whatever this product is, then obviously we're going to care about the total output from all of the plants. And what the firm would do is it would determine its output for each plant by that same marginal revenue equals marginal cost rule for each individual firm. It's just that, again, we would have to add up all the output from all of the different plants that are producing the good. And you can see that here. For each individual plant from the firm, they would set marginal revenue equal to marginal cost. And then we just would need to add that all up together. And we would see that here. Here they're adding up from plant 1 and plant 2 the total marginal cost curve across all of the plants. And this isn't that complicated. Okay. Now, the if a firm has a monopoly, then we're going to want to do two things. We're going to want to measure how much power it has, and we're going to want to know why is it that they have that monopoly power. Um, in terms of measuring their actual power, we're going to calculate something known as the Lerner index. And what this is it's going to look at that difference, that degree of markup, basically, that difference between the marginal cost and the price, and look at that as a ratio over the price. And we can rewrite that Lerner index in terms of the equation we just looked at before with the elasticity of demand. That basically, as we already saw, the Lerner index, which is just telling us how much power the monopoly has, is equal to the negative inverse of the elasticity of demand. And that would be, again, our Lerner index. We've got our same rule of thumb for pricing right here, where the price is equal to the marginal cost over 1 plus 1 over the elasticity of demand. Can't emphasize enough. How important this is. The markup is, again, equal to the minus the inverse of the elasticity of demand. So it matters what you are a monopolist at selling. Is it an essential good or not so much? Because if it is elastic, who cares? The markup is going to be pretty small for whatever you're selling. In some sense, or read another way, it wouldn't be too entirely inconceivable that it would be allowed that we have a monopoly for the maker of a number 3 pencil. Why? Because the markup isn't very much. Why is the markup not very much? Because the elasticity of demand, or the sensitivity of demand to price for a number 3 pencil, is pretty darn high, which means that the markup is pretty darn low. Because no one has to have a number 3 pencil. Whereas for the learner index, if there were only a single company that produced number 2 pencils, the markup would be quite large. Because the inverse of the elasticity of demand, well, just the elasticity of demand, is so low. So now we're looking at the inverse of that, which would be high. Okay. Um, um, we don't need this example. I'm just curious about what. I haven't seen most of these movies. This is not on the test. This is not important. I've seen Star Wars. I've seen Empire. I've seen Raiders. Oh, I did see Force Awakens. Oh, I did see Inside Out. I like that movie. And I did see The Hunger Games. None of the others. Okay. Oh, I see what they're saying. For selling VHS tapes, they really didn't have any idea. Look how much they were charging for some of these. $80 to own Empire Strikes Back. Whereas Star Wars Force Awakens on DVD is $30. I think what they're just trying to say here is that prices went down because they had a better understanding of the various ways that one could own a movie. And now DVDs are even less expensive because there is so much competition for different ways to own that product. This isn't on the exam or really important at all. It's just for me talking. Okay. Again, this example isn't important, but I'm going to just keep talking about it. As back in the day, when there was only VCR tapes, and that was the only way to get a copy of the movie to own, VHS tapes could cost a lot, and people would be pretty inelastic. So there was pretty huge markup. Once you have DVDs, well, then there could be a DVD copy of it or a VHS copy of it. So you're going to get a little bit more elasticity in terms of DVD versus VHS, which means that the markup is going to be a little bit lower. Then after DVDs, remember we had like Blu-ray, and then after that we had streaming. Well, now it's pretty low. The only kind of exception you can kind of think of would be maybe even something like Apple, maybe, right? And the fact that if you use the Apple Store to buy the movie, then it's kind of like integrated it for all of your devices and whatnot that use Apple. Everything else, it's just like a copy of the movie on your computer that you can watch whenever you want. Okay, so now we need to know how did a firm get the power that it has? To remind ourselves, as the slide starts off here, the more power that the monopolistic firm has, the more power that it has is inverse to the degree of elasticity. So, the relationship between elasticity and monopoly power. So, that would mean if we're looking at the source of that monopoly power, we need to look at the sources of the elasticity of demand. And what determines the elasticity? Well, part of it would be how essential the product is, but also it's going to be determined by how many firms out there are making that product and what is the interaction between those firms for producing that product. Um, if there are many firms that exist, then we'll see that the markup will be a lot lower than if there really is only a single firm. Um, it also is going to matter um, it's also going to matter what the degree of competition is between the firms. How much rivalry is there? I guess this is an important point right here, though, too. What this slide kind of is sliding into doing, which is a little bit sneaky, is that we started out this chapter by saying a monopoly is just a single seller of a good or product. But in reality, the realistic interpretation of monopoly is that sometimes you could have two or three firms that exist and it'd still be called a monopoly, just because there is so few. Okay. So in the case again of a single firm, what we'd call the pure monopolist, um, then all of the monopoly power, the degree of monopoly power, is all going to depend absolutely on that elasticity of market demand. If there are a few firms that exist, so we have kind of a weaker version of a monopoly, then we will see that the elasticity of demand from any single firm is obviously going to be a little bit lower because of that degree of competition. The other source of that monopoly power would be the number of firms. Um, and so, what you would want to do if you were a monopoly is you're going to want to find a way to you're going to want to find a way um, if you're a monopoly, you're going to want to find a way to stop other firms from entering that marketplace. And that would be the only way that you can ensure that you're going to capture additional revenue. Probably the firm that has it the easiest would be the natural monopoly. Because in the case of the natural monopoly, that firm um, is going to supply the entire market by just because of the nature of the costs within the firm. The only other thing a monopoly can do is spend big money on patents, copyrights, and licenses, which is the government's way of sanctioning the existence of a monopoly in an attempt to encourage that monopolist to get involved to produce that good. We want Hawaiian Electric to be producing electricity, right? And so, because of those economies of scale, for instance, we allow them to do that because we really want electricity. Just like in the case of medicines, which are protected under patents, we want companies to develop pharmaceutical drugs that are going to save people. So we give them a patent, and they get a really high profit from that protected patent. Okay. Um, okay, I'm just going to pause this for a second. Okay, so now that we have an idea of why, um, how, how a monopoly captures its power, and what having that power does to the price. In other words, a more powerful monopolistic firm is going to be the one that sells an inelastic good because they can charge the highest markup um, over marginal costs. What that also leads us to discussing is how, or again, leads us to discussing what the impact is for the firm, um, and what um, what the social costs are to having a monopoly. That social cost is actually known as the deadweight loss. The deadweight loss, as you can see right here, is a triangle. And the question would be is geometrically, what gives an area? What gives it an area? Well, that would be 1/2 base times height. Here's our base. Look at that. The height is the reduction from output if they were perfectly competitive to output when they're a monopolist. If that monopolist is selling a pretty inelastic good, that height is going to be pretty high, which would mean that the deadweight loss is going to be high. I'll repeat that again. If the monopolist is selling an inelastic good, then the height of the deadweight loss triangle is going to be pretty large, meaning there's going to be a pretty large difference between the quantity sold by a monopolist and the quantity sold by a perfectly competitive firm. And so if that height is high, that's going to give you a really high deadweight loss, which is why you're going to see that um, the government is much more likely to get involved if the product being sold is inelastic, which is what we have right here. What would that be? That would be, for instance, something like an electric company. That'd be something like a pharmaceutical drug, something along those lines. So, the role of the government is to reduce that degree of deadweight loss. And it's also why the government doesn't get involved if the monopoly involves a elastic good, because the deadweight loss will be pretty small. So why get involved? Remember, monopolists face an incentive to engage in rent seeking. They will engage in rent seeking behavior, which is basically wasted effort. It's a wasted effort to maintain their monopoly status. Mm, no, we didn't find it for Hawaiian Electric, but let's pick a. I'm going to look at the electric company for New York City. And it looks like it spent almost $1 million on lobbying of various kinds. That's $1 million of wasted money. Basically, the electric company trying to maintain its status as the electric company. That's what that represents. And that is rent seeking, and that is socially unproductive. Okay. So, what we see is that typically for a monopolist, you would see some price regulation, which is what happens. Um, which is what happens for the Public Utility Commission with Hawaiian Electric. The Public Utility Commission gets to determine what Hawaiian Electric charges and what counts as a expense of the utility. So, what kind of price are they going to charge? Well, they can't charge the perfectly competitive price. That we know. They can't have a zero profit situation. Otherwise, they won't get involved in being a monopolist if they can't earn any money doing it. We don't want the price to equal the demand curve, because if it does, then the deadweight loss is the largest. So instead, what we do is we charge a price lower than if they were unregulated monopolist, but higher than if perfectly competitive. So we kind of basically try to split the difference. And that's basically what you see here. Let me try to zoom in on this. Let's get rid of this here. If it were perfectly competitive, it would have charged this price right here. So it's called QPC. And it would have charged this price perfectly competitive. And we know this to be true because if it were perfectly competitive, then the average revenue would equal the demand, would equal the price. If it were perfectly competitive, that price would be too low. And so we want to avoid the monopolistic price existing. And the reason for that would be with this high price, you get this large reduction in the amount of this good being produced. And so what you do again, is kind of charge a price in the middle. So you get some of the benefits of having that monopolist build this industry, yet they don't all go out of business. Okay. And so we just see a continuation of this, that the price charged is going to be something higher than perfectly competitive price, but lower than the unregulated monopolist. What makes natural monopoly a natural monopoly is that its marginal revenue curve really only reaches its lowest point at a very large quantity. And we're seeing that right here. If this firm, and you can clearly see this here, if the firm were forced to act like a perfectly competitive firm, then the price charged would be right here. Look at that. That price charged would be below the average cost. So you can't get away with charging the competitive price. Instead, you regulate it so that the firm is guaranteed to cover all of its costs plus a little bit more. In the case of a typical utility electric company, you're typically talking about a firm covers all of its costs plus gains a profit of about anywhere between 4 to 6%. So that'd be kind of the return on capital for owning um, a utility. And that's what we see right here. The only thing we can kind of add to this is if any of you have spent, kind of any time ever looking at what how Hawaiian Electric exists um, as a company, then you would know that their reaction to things are sometimes their reaction to things is sometimes delayed because they don't really face an incentive to be that competitive, um, because they always know that they're going to cover their costs plus get a guaranteed rate of profit. And so they're going to be slow to do things. And also, the regulators are going to be slow to implement change because they're not in the industry themselves. So, as a consequence, um, what um, the regulators then either have to have some industry experts within them, or on the other part of it, what you would do is instead of having the regulators meet more often, as the kind of the last paragraph identifies here, you could have them um, allowed be allowed to increase rates by like inflation plus some extra amount to cover any increased capital cost or anything like that. Okay, and then that takes us to monopsonies, and I don't want to say too much. I don't want to say too much about this. Um, in fact, sorry, I'm just trying to make sure with our remaining time how much I want to talk about this. You know what? Let's just hold off on this for right now. Let's hold off on monopsonies. Okay. So, okay. I think that I'm going to end this chapter early just because we're trying to do a lot in a short period of time. Okay. That's gonna cover the material you're responsible for chapter 10.